And welcome to this evening. This is the first night of the Faith, Film, Philosophy 2024 series. Our theme this year is Spiritual Film Themes in a Secular Age. We have a wonderful set of series of events taking place over each evening this week, examining spiritual issues as they appear in popular movies and TV series. I hope you'll forgive me for making you wait tonight and come back. We promise we'll start on time tomorrow night. The series of events is organized by the Gonzaga Faith and Reason Institute, of which I am the director. I didn't introduce myself, sorry. I'm David Calhoun. I teach in the philosophy department here at Gonzaga. But the other hat I wear that's relevant to tonight is I direct the Gonzaga Faith and Reason Institute, which is the organizer of this event and a series of events that take place this week. The Institute is dedicated to developing an integrationist understanding of faith and reason, particularly as faith and reason are articulated in the Catholic intellectual tradition. The Institute does this in several main areas: science, nature, and philosophical theology, both historically and in the present; philosophical reflection on the existence and nature of God; attention to the problem of evil and suffering; and the cultural and social impact of Christianity. The present series on faith, film, and philosophy is an instance of the last of these emphases, namely attending to the cultural place of Christian ideas as they appear in popular culture or as they provide a lens for critically examining popular culture. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the friends and donors who makes events supported by the Institute possible. The Institute is generously supported by the Father Robert J. Spitzer Society of Jesus Leadership Fund, which was created when Father Robert Spitzer retired as Gonzaga's president in 2009. A great number of friends of Father Spitzer and of Gonzaga University have contributed to this fund over the years. The Institute is deeply grateful for their support and indebted to all of them for the gifts that make events like tonight's talk possible. This year's Faith, Film, and Philosophy series is motivated by a question: is there still space for spiritual themes, faith, transcendence, human meaning, the sacred, the holy, in popular films and series? We might think that the answer to this question is no. Consider two blockbuster biopics of last year: Napoleon by Ridley Scott and Oppenheimer by Christopher Nolan. One told the story of the world historical figure who lived through what might reasonably be described as the most severely secularizing period of Western history, the French Revolution, and then as a general and then as an emperor, battled with and promoted the cultural restoration in Europe of the Catholic Church. And yet in Scott's film, religion and the church provide little more than background decor. Similarly, Robert Oppenheimer's fascination with Eastern religion and philosophy surfaces only in isolated scraps in Christopher Nolan's film, including the repurposing of the famous quote from the Bhagavad Gita about death, the destroyer of worlds, as a casual line in a sexual encounter, which actually offended a lot of Hindus, by the way. The other blockbuster of last year, Greta Gerwig's Barbie, which will be screened free tomorrow night as the second event of the series, starting promptly at 7 o'clock. So that's over in Hemmingson Auditorium, down in the basement of Hemmingson 004. Greta Gerwig's Barbie succeeds in building a surprising story of existential awakening and personal growth that is scaffolded onto a scant pink plastic foundation. And yet the film seems absent of transcendent spiritual themes. Or maybe not. That's what we're going to have after the screening, a panel of 4 faculty members here at Gonzaga who will give you their take on it. We'll have time for Q&A at the end of the film, so I hope you'll come to that. I'm extraordinarily pleased that our first scholar to address this question of spiritual film themes in a secular age is my friend, former colleague, and the prior director of the Gonzaga Faith and Reason Institute, Brian B. Clayton. Brian was a member of the Gonzaga philosophy department for 30-some years until his retirement just a year and a half ago. He was a master teacher of a number of specialties, including philosophy of human nature in the university core and advanced courses in faith and reason, film, and Walker Percy. Of special note was his senior level course on C.S. Lewis, which was legendary as a deep dive into the complexities of Lewis's fiction, philosophical theology, and reflections on culture and literature. Some of Dr. Clayton's friends have been twisting his arm to turn that course into a book of some kind, such that people who were not blessed with the opportunity to take the course can benefit and profit from his insights. He's the co-author of a book on faith and reason titled Two Wings, and was the co-editor of a collection of essays on the philosophy of Clint Eastwood that grew organically from papers that were a part of the Faith Film Philosophy Seminar over the years. In fact, I didn't know this, he just told me at dinner tonight, but a viewing of Clint Eastwood's Pale Rider and wondering, wait, this looks like it's strangely enough a retelling of the themes that you find in Shame, but with a weirdly supernatural twist to them. That thought led to him talking to a colleague, and that gave birth into the Faith Film Philosophy series way back in 2009, if I'm remembering, somewhere around there. So it's been going on for a number of years. Anyway, our talk tonight, though, is on M. Night Shyamalan, who I know is one of Dr. Clayton's favorite filmmakers. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Clayton back to Gonzaga to present his talk, I See Dead People, Spiritual Quests in the Films of M. Night Shyamalan. Dr. Clayton.
First, I'm hoarse. I have no idea why. So if you can't hear me, wave at me or something, and I'll try to boost up the volume here. Okay. It's wonderful to be back at Gonzaga. I spent 36 years here, and this building brings back great memories. I had to walk by room 127, that pie-shaped room, if you've ever been in that one. I taught lots of sections of ethics in that particular classroom. So it's wonderful to be back here and to see old friends and colleagues and to meet new students that I don't know. So welcome and thank you for coming tonight. I do want to thank Dr. Calhoun for organizing the events of this week and the students who have helped him and others who've advised him in this. And I hope that you will take advantage of the public events as you are able. It's a lot of fun. If you're like me and you like films, the chance just to talk about films with other people who are really interested in film is a wonderful exercise, right? Well, exercise is probably not a good word. It's just a delightful experience to share that kind of enthusiasm in a particular art form. Well, tonight, as Dr. Calhoun mentioned, that this is the first public lecture in a week-long series of events sponsored by the Faith and Reason Institute and focusing on the theme, spiritual themes in a secular age. In the call for proposals for the Friday and Saturday non-public, there are some other private events that go on. Secret things are said about films. So for the non-public seminar that's held in conjunction with the public events, the following question is raised. Is there still space for spiritual themes, faith, transcendence, human meaning, the sacred, the holy, in popular films and series? The call for proposals goes on to motivate the question by noting that some of the major films of the past several years seem to have left out the role of religion as it relates to the stories being told, and Dr. Calhoun gave examples of those. Thus, we get the title of this series, Spiritual Film Themes in a Secular Age. So what should we make of this topic and question? As a philosopher, I have to ask, what do you mean by spiritual, by secular? What are spiritual film themes? What is it for an age to be secular? The philosopher's first move will almost always be to define terms so that one knows exactly what questions are being asked and what topic is being discussed. This seems to be a good first move, so that's where we're going to begin. The lead question gives example of spiritual themes, so in the announcement. Faith, transcendence, human meaning, the sacred, the holy. This is not an exhaustive list of such themes, and each of these expressions in this limited list deserves discussion of its own definition, but we're not going to do that. Instead, notice that when particular films are given as examples, it is the absence of religion and the church, especially the Roman Catholic Church, that is taken to be emblematic of the absence of spiritual themes. What is the relation of spiritual themes to religion and the church? Well, religion is notoriously difficult to define, but I think we can safely treat it in this context as a social phenomenon where beliefs and practices are taken by its adherents to put them in relation with some reality that stands behind or is other than the everyday world we experience with our senses. I should have made that much shorter, obviously, or broken it up into a couple of sentences. A religion is some more or less well-organized set of beliefs and practices aimed at addressing the spiritual themes, for example, faith, transcendence, human meaning, and so forth. The church, on this view, would be an institution that is meant to facilitate adherence to the beliefs and practices of a particular religion, in this case, Christianity. Of course, our world is religiously diverse, that is, there are many different religions, and not all of these religions will have such an identifiable institutional identity as the church. Moreover, not all pursuit of the spiritual themes results in religion. For example, there are philosophical systems and movements that attempt to address our spiritual themes, but without involving themselves in what we would think of as a religion. I take it that Confucianism is something of this sort. We're also familiar with this on an everyday level when someone tells us that they are spiritual but not religious. The bottom line is that our focus should be on the so-called spiritual themes and only incidentally concerned with religion, church, or other religious institutions. As a shorthand, we may say that a spiritual outlook is one that acknowledges at least the possibility of some kind of transcendent reality, whether this be, for example, Platonic forms, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or the Tao. So let us turn to the other key term, secular.
Brian, can I ask a question? Do you have slides? We're still on the first. We're going to get some more Shyamalan music here.
First slide.
Okay, very good. I didn't want people to miss out.
So let us turn to the other key term, secular. Here I will draw briefly on the works of the Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor, whose masterful and magisterial book, A Secular Age, can help us. Taylor identifies three distinct but interrelated ways in which we talk about the secular. Secular one focuses on the way in which religion and irreligion, for that matter, have become increasingly private. Public spaces have been emptied of God. Of secularity in this sense, he writes, as we function within various spheres of activity, the norms and principles we follow, the deliberations we engage in, generally don't refer us to God or to any religious beliefs. The considerations we act on are internal to the rationality of each sphere. Maximum gain within the economy, the greatest benefit to the greatest number in the political area, and so on. He notes that this is a situation compatible with the existence of large numbers of people actively involved in religious institutions and practices. But these days, unless one lives in Texas, where I now live, or elsewhere in the South, where I was born, one simply doesn't talk about God in public. And perhaps that is why filmmakers would not include religion or even certain spiritualities and spiritual themes in their work. Taylor's Secular 2 focuses on the falling off of religious belief and practice in people turning away from God and no longer going to church. There has been a decline of this sort, of course, and so perhaps filmmakers figure that there is a decline in the number of customers in their audience who will pay for films that address spiritual themes. Films with spiritual themes will be boutique items, appealing to a niche audience. But it is Taylor's Secular 3 that most interest him and me. It is connected to the other two kinds of secularity, but it focuses on a different dimension, what Taylor calls the conditions of belief. He writes, "The question I want to answer is, why was it virtually impossible not to believe in God in, say, 1500 in our Western society, while in 2000, many of us find this not only easy, but even inescapable?" He argues that the assumptions that provide the background to our beliefs and practices, the context in which we confront religious and/or spiritual questions, these assumptions, this context have changed so that the experience of belief or unbelief has changed. For us, belief is optional. We realize that people can live good and decent lives without believing in or engaging in any practices with respect to any supposed transcendent reality. Taylor's 700-page book is an investigation of and argument regarding how this secularization has happened. So this takes us back to our original question. Is there still space for spiritual themes in popular films and series? We might now slightly reword this as, have our cultural conditions of belief so changed that it might not occur to filmmakers to make films that include spiritual themes, or that such films, if made, would have anything beyond a niche audience? Now, the straightforward answer to this complex question would seem to be yes, but this is still compatible with the view that some filmmakers might want to make such films, and that such films would find a wide audience. M. Night Shyamalan is one such filmmaker. In the rest of this talk, I want to look at some of Shyamalan's films to see how he has included spiritual themes in his films, what these themes are and what he seems to be saying about them. I will consider and respond to a criticism of this view arising from Shyamalan's more recent films. Now, two caveats. First, this lecture is not so much a philosophical inquiry, so we've kind of done the philosophy at this point, as it is a sort of travelogue, you might say, in which I will point out certain features of some of Shyamalan's films. The aim would be to provide a greater appreciation and understanding of what Shyamalan is doing. Secondly, despite the published title of this lecture, my focus is less on spiritual quest and more on spiritual themes. So, Shyamalan. It might be useful to begin with a bit of background on Shyamalan, since it gives us an idea of spiritual ideas and experiences with which he was familiar. His parents were physicians who immigrated to Philadelphia from India. Knight's mother returned to her home city in India to give birth to him, but then brought him back to the States where he grew up. The Shyamalans were Hindus, so Knight grew up with Hindu religious belief and practice. When he was old enough to go to school, he attended Waldron Mercy Academy, a Roman Catholic grammar school, where he experienced Roman Catholic belief and practice. Later, he graduated from the Episcopal Academy, a high school, and then went to NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. Knight became interested in film when he was a boy. As he tells the story, it was Raiders of the Lost Ark that changed his life, when one of his friends more or less forced him into seeing the movie in a theater. It opened up a new universe to him. He was hooked on movies and began making short amateur films at home. And the journey from amateur movie lover to professional movie maker faced two obstacles. First, not only were his parents physicians, so were most of the adults in his extended family. So the aunts and uncles, they're all physicians. Everyone expected Knight to take his place in the family business. And he's obviously smart enough he could have done that. The second obstacle was money. He had no idea how to finance his proposed career. This latter obstacle was overcome with the help of Spike Lee's book on guerrilla filmmaking that showed him how to finance and make films with very little money. Knight overcame the first obstacle then by making films that turned out to be financially successful. I mean, when you're making films that bring in tens of millions of dollars or more, the parents kind of go, well, okay, maybe this will work out. Thus far, Knight has been associated with 20 released films and 2 television series. Our focus is going to be on the films. Now, of the 20 films, there are 4 that Shyamalan did not direct. She's All That in 1998, Stuart Little in 1999, Devil in 2010, and The Watchers in 2024. Of the remaining 16 films, there are 4 whose story did not originate with Shyamalan. The Last Airbender from 2008, which is based on the Nickelodeon animated series. After Earth, 2013, based on the story by Will Smith. Old, 2021, based on a graphic novel, Sandcastle, which is well worth reading, by the way. And Knock at the Cabin, 2023, based on Paul G. Tremblay's novel, Cabin at the End of the World. The remaining 12 films are, in my view, Shyamalan films in the most complete sense. He originated the story, wrote the screenplay, and directed each of these films. He has also served as producer on all but 2 of these films, Wide Awake and The Sixth Sense. So what I want to do is give a quick summary of each of the 12 films. And start with Praying with Anger, which was his student film. Released to like 1 theater or 2 theaters or something in 1992. It's the coming of age story of Indian American college student Dev Rahman, who after the death of his father goes to India to study for a year and to connect with his heritage. The film deals with themes of death, meaning and purpose, and love. The next film, in 1998, is the coming of age story of Joshua A. Beale, a 5th grader at Waldron Mercy Academy, the same school that Knight went to. The recent death of Joshua's grandfather sends him on a quest to find God and to ask him if his grandfather is okay. The film's themes are evil, God's existence, divine providence, love, and children. 1999, The Sixth Sense. It's a ghost story in which psychologist Malcolm Crowe, played by Bruce Willis, works with 9-year-old Cole Sear. Cole sees dead people who are unaware that they are dead. The themes here are death, evil, meaning, purpose, love, children, and family. We're starting to see a pattern. In 2000, he released Unbreakable, which is a comic book superhero story about character David Dunn, the only survivor of the wreck of runaway train East Rail 177. He emerged untouched, unbroken. Might he be not just unbroken, but unbreakable? He's contacted by Elijah Price, who suffers from type 1 osteogenesis imperfecta, or bone disease. Elijah is trying to identify the purpose of his life, and he sees Dunn's existence as a clue to that purpose. The themes are natural and moral evil, meaning and purpose, love, and again, children and family. In 2002, Signs, which I take to be a parable in the guise of science fiction alien invasion story. It focuses on the Hess family who live on a farm amid cornfields in rural Bucks County, PA. Father Graham Hess is a former Episcopal priest who lost his faith and left the church after the death of his wife Colleen in a freakish accident. The other members of the household are also afflicted, for want of a better word, in various ways. The other members of the household, the film shows us the family dealing with their suffering even as they find themselves in the midst of what seems to be an alien invasion. The themes are evil, death, purpose, providence versus luck, children, and family. 2004, The Village. It's a coming of age, oops, there it is again, love story that focuses on blind Ivy Walker and her beloved Lucius Hunt. Their village is surrounded by woods that they are never to enter and that are inhabited by those we don't speak of. The elders of the village had left the towns behind in an effort to escape cruelty and suffering. When Lucius is stabbed by Noah Percy, who saw Lucius as his rival for Ivy's affection, Ivy proposes to journey through the woods and to the town to get medicine to heal Lucius. The themes, once again, are evil, death, purpose, children, family. Lady in the Water. This is a fairy tale that originated as a bedtime story Shyamalan made up for his daughters. Once upon a time, in the Philadelphia apartment complex known as the Cove, the superintendent, Cleveland Heath, found a young lady in the swimming pool. Her name was Story, and she was a water nymph, a narf, who was trying to return to her home, the Blue World. Cleveland gathers members of the apartment complex community to help him return Story to her world. In the process, he addresses his own great loss. The themes are death, suffering, community, family, children, and faith. 2008, the film was The Happening. It's a science fiction thriller about the results of environmental degradation. Trees and other plants are releasing a toxin that affects human neurotransmitters, and it leads to humans killing themselves. After 2001, the sight of people jumping off of buildings, tall buildings, and falling, right, was difficult for people to watch, as you can imagine. The release of the toxin is a defensive response on the part of plant life to deal with the environmental threat that humans pose. Set in New York and Pennsylvania, the humans believe at first that this is some kind of terrorist attack. They flee the cities, which are the initial hotspots, but the toxin follows them. The attack ends almost as quickly and mysteriously as it began. But just when life seems to be returning to normal, another breakout occurs, this time in France. The themes are death, human purpose, providence, and love. The Visit. This low-budget thriller marks Shyamalan's comeback after the critical and commercial failures of Lady in the Water, The Happening, The Last Airbender, and After Earth. The film focuses on two teens who are sent to visit grandparents they've never met so that their mother, who has been estranged from her parents for 15 years, can go on a cruise with her current boyfriend. The visit starts out well enough, but soon the kids are seeing the grandparents behave in increasingly odd ways, like the grandmother wandering nude through the house after 9:30. Oddness turns into threat and aggression. The kids eventually have to kill the grandparents, who turn out to have been escapees from a nearby psychiatric hospital. They'd never seen the grandparents, so they didn't know. Right? Themes are madness, which is a new emphasis for Shyamalan. Madness, evil, children, family, and love. 2016's film was Split. It's the story of Kevin Wendell Crumb, a man with dissociative identity disorder who kidnaps 3 teen girls in a parking lot. We're introduced to some of the 23 alternative personalities, who share the light at various times. And we learn that these alters are the result of the abuse that Kevin as a child experienced at his mother's hands. One of the alters, Patricia, talks about the coming appearance of a new alter, the Beast, who has plans to rid the world of the impure, those who have not suffered. The Beast appears, kills Kevin's psychiatrist, and eats the flesh of 2 of the teen girls. He spares the 3rd girl, Casey, because her upper torso reveals the scars of her own abuse. At the end of the film, the Beast is still on the loose, and David Dunn makes a brief appearance, and we learn that we're in the same cinematic world we encountered in Unbreakable. The themes are evil, purpose and meaning, children, family. 2019's film Glass begins where Split ended. The Beast has continued to kidnap, torture, and kill teen girls. David Dunn has been looking for the Beast in order to end the killing spree. When Dunn finally finds the Beast, both of them are captured by the police and sent to the psychiatric hospital where Elijah Price, known as Mr. Glass, is also held. Their psychiatrist attempts to convince them that they are delusional, that they are neither superheroes nor supervillains. Glass manages to free the trio from the hospital, but all three of them wind up being killed, and the authorities realize too late that Glass had managed to have the whole thing videoed. So and he did this in the hopes that others would consider the possibility and explore the possibility that they too were somehow superhuman and they had special powers. The themes, again, are evil, purpose and meaning, children and family. Okay, and then the final film, which came out just this year, is Trap. It's the story of a father and daughter attending a Philadelphia concert by the pop singer Lady Raven, who was played by one of Shyamalan's daughters. The father notices an unusually large police presence at the concert and discovers that the event is being used to attract a serial killer, the butcher. The father, Cooper Abbott, is a serial killer. Much of the film shows the butcher figuring out how to get out of the trap and back home after the concert. He reveals his identity to Lady Raven and coerces her into helping him escape. She winds up revealing his identity to his wife, and she manages to alert the police. Cooper is eventually captured, but as the police drive him away, we see that he's already working to unlock his handcuffs. The themes are evil, death, children, and family. So, if one looks at those themes as a whole, there are at least 6, I think, that we can think of as spiritual. Evil and death is a threat to human meaningfulness, of the meaningfulness of human lives, and a threat to belief in the transcendent. Providence, divine sovereignty, and luck, and how those things are connected with the possibility of signs. Meaning or purpose of human life, faith, related to the existence of a transcendent or immaterial reality, children, family, community, and almost always love. Okay, now not all of these themes appear in all 12 of the films that we've talked about, nor do those that do appear always receive equal emphasis. We don't have time to examine all of these films. I'm going to focus on just 3 of them: Wide Awake, Signs, and Lady in the Water. All 3 of these films are from the first half of Shyamalan's career and represent what I consider to be classic Shyamalan. Big films with big themes. So we're going to begin with Wide Awake. As already mentioned, this is a coming-of-age story focused on 5th grader Joshua A. Beale, whose beloved grandfather has recently died of bone marrow cancer. I want to consider this film in some detail because it is probably the Shyamalan film with which people are the least familiar. How many people have seen Wide Awake? My wife has seen it multiple times. That's my fault. Okay, so just a couple. Good. But I think it's an important film to understand for understanding Shyamalan. It seems to me that all of the spiritual themes that appear in Shyamalan's other films are already present in this first film. The opening titles of the film are accompanied by an audio flashback, so we just hear the voices, right? It's a flashback of Joshua's grandfather tossing the football to him. Joshua is afraid, but his grandfather encourages him and tells him to keep his hands out and to open his eyes. Heeding his grandfather, Joshua manages to catch the ball. We then see Joshua asleep in bed, eyes firmly closed on the first day of school. His mother and father, both of whom we later learn are doctors, right, medical doctors, they have to drag Joshua out of bed, dress him, and help him brush his teeth. He needs to heed his grandfather's admonition to open his eyes. The film is then divided into 3 sections, labeled respectively September, the questions, December, the signs, and May, the answers. Throughout the film, there are also 4 flashback episodes involving Joshua and his grandfather that speak particularly to spiritual themes. Moreover, as we will see, Shyamalan is doing all of this with clear awareness of what Taylor calls secular 3, the conditions of belief, right, under which we operate in our culture. In the September section, there are 2 flashbacks. The first of these occurs as Joshua talks about his close relationship with his devout Roman Catholic grandfather, who Joshua later tells us believed 2 things: always keep both hands on the ball, and always hold on to your faith. Faith will get you through. In the flashback, Joshua tells us that he would sleep in his grandfather's room whenever he was ill or had a bad dream, and that his grandfather would watch over him. The last time this happened, Joshua was ill and had had a bad dream, so both things. His grandfather had gone away. That was the bad thing that happened. Joshua's grandfather reassured him by saying that he wasn't going anywhere. Back in the present, Joshua states flatly he lied. In the second flashback, we see how Joshua came to learn of his grandfather's illness. Excuse me. They are at Mass, and Joshua is focused on his grandfather, touching him, pulling in his neck fat, right? You see kids do that? My grandkids do it all the time. And generally doing the kinds of things bored kids do, right, at his age, what they do with their grandparents. At communion, the celebrant invites those who are ill and want to receive to come forward first. Joshua watches as a lady leaves their pew to go forward, then turns to say something to his grandfather, only to see that his grandfather has also gone forward. The look on Joshua's face tells us that he is shocked and uncomprehending. Why has his grandfather gone forward with those who are ill? When his grandfather returns to the pew, Joshua notices for the first time that his grandfather's hands are trembling as he holds his beads and prays the rosary. What both flashbacks emphasize, of course, is that one of the themes of the film is the problem of evil, and especially the problem of death. In between the 2 flashbacks comes a scene where Joshua observes light streaming from above through a large window in the hallway of the Roman Catholic boys' school that he attends. It is here that Joshua conceives of a mission, a quest, which we eventually learn is to look for God to find out if his deceased grandfather is okay. The implication seems to be that Joshua is inspired from above to undertake this mission. When Joshua later shares his mission with Dave O'Hara, his daredevil best friend, Dave gently makes fun of him. You can't look for God? Where in the world are you going to look? Dave explains that he doesn't believe in God because too many bad things happen to people for no reason, which is a nice summary of the problem of evil. Joshua begins his mission by trying to find someone who might know God and be able to ask God about his grandfather's well-being. He manages to sneak out of his school to go speak with Cardinal Geary, who is rumored to talk to God and to perform miracles. He is speaking at the Catholic school, girls' school next door. Joshua's meeting with the Cardinal is a disappointment. It turns out that in person, the Cardinal is just an old man in poor health. Joshua never even asks him a question. The second section of the film, December, the signs, seems on first viewing to be misnamed, maybe on second, third, fourth, and fifth viewings as well. It shows us further episodes in Joshua's search. He speaks with a school priest who agrees that he too is seeking God and tells Joshua that doubts seem to be part of everyone's journey. Joshua tries to talk the family into taking a Christmas vacation in Rome in a not so subtle effort to speak with the Pope, whom he calls God's best friend. We find out through a conversation he has with one of the nuns at school that on his mission he has explored other religions, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, but with no success. Near the end of this section of the film, his friend Dave asks him if he has gotten a sign, any sign. The answer seems to be no. So for a section referring to signs, there don't seem to be any, or at least not many. But this section of the film is particularly relevant to the theme of this week's events because Shyamalan shows that he is very aware of the way in which secularization, qua conditions of belief, challenges spiritual beliefs, practices, and quests. For example, the literature on secularization frequently identifies the importance of disenchantment in the secularization process. The enchanted world is one in which places, things, persons, events are seen to have power of an other than natural sort. For example, relics with healing powers. The disenchanted world has lost these other than natural powers, or at the least, there is skepticism about any claims that such powers are operative. Shyamalan illustrates disenchantment in this section of the film in a scene where Joshua and his mother visit a toy store in search of a birthday gift for one of his friends. Joshua says, "You know what? I think I just had a revelation." Mom says, "Really?" "Yeah, I used to think this place was magic. I'd see the toys, I'd see all kinds of magical worlds. What do you see now? Plastic and paint. Well, there's still some magic, but it gets less and less every year. Maybe by the time I have a son, I won't even remember the magic anymore." Now, we might call this growing up, but there's clearly a loss here, and Joshua is aware of it as a loss. In a disenchanted world, it becomes more difficult to believe in magic or in any reality beyond the horizon of the world machine in which we seem to live. A second way in which Shyamalan shows his awareness of the challenge secularization poses occurs in another episode in this section of the film. The episode begins with Dave challenging Joshua. "This whole mission business is getting out of hand. You're wigging, man. I'll let it slide as long as possible. People are talking. In all this time and all the stuff you've been doing, have you gotten one sign, any sign, to let you know there is a God? No. So what does that say? I'll tell you what it says. Either there ain't no God, or there is a God and he don't care that you're looking for him. Either way, it's time to stop." Joshua goes home that night, and he sits in his grandfather's rocking chair with his eyes closed. And in a voiceover, he prays, "Starting to doubt my mission. I really need a sign to know whether to keep going or not. I need one bad." He follows this by rushing into his parents' bedroom, where his mother is reading in bed. "Anything happen in here?" "What do you mean happen?" "Well, like lights flickering or a strong wind or holy vision, anything like that?" "I didn't see anything, honey." Now, the book that she's reading, that she has in her hand and that she's reading, is The Philosophy of Nietzsche. Nietzsche, of course, was the 19th century philosopher who proclaimed that God is dead and we have killed him. Nietzsche acknowledged the secularization that had occurred in our culture and traced out the multiple social consequences of the death of God. I take it then that Shyamalan is directly and knowingly addressing the possibility of spiritual belief and practice in a secularized cultural context. When Joshua returns to his room, there is a third flashback. He and his grandfather are walking through a snow-covered landscape. His grandfather asks him not to cry. So Joshua asks his grandfather if he is scared. His grandfather says that he isn't, that he knows that God will take care of him when he gets to him. Joshua is skeptical. "How do you know for sure? I mean, lots of things are made up." Superman ain't real. Neither is Indiana Jones. What if someone just made him up? And his grandfather points to the snow around them and says that it is proof of God's existence, to which Joshua responds, "Isn't snow frozen water vapor that falls to the earth in soft, white, crystalline flakes?" His grandfather acknowledges that that is what snow is, but says that there is more to the existence of snow than what Joshua recognizes. He tells Joshua that he will need to find his own proof. In other words, this is something that neither the grandfather nor anyone else can do for Joshua. If it is to be done, he must do the work himself. He will have to learn how to see the signs. The episode ends with Joshua going to the window in his room and seeing that a real snowfall has started. It's kind of a reference back to an earlier scene where there was snow falling at night, but when he woke up the next morning, no snow on the ground. Just left snow on the ground. Again, this section of the film is oddly named. The section title would seem to lead us to believe that it will be filled with signs that lead to the answer to the questions raised in the first section of the film. But there appear to be no such signs. Shyamalan seems to be acknowledging the difficulties in seeing signs in a secularized world. The final section of the film is the answers. In this section, there are 5 of Joshua's friends who play important roles. First, there is Robert, the class weirdo, who throughout the film has done bizarre things, such as acting like one of Stanley Kubrick's apes from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Okay. This section begins with Robert taking a picture of the Pope off the classroom wall, running outside in the pouring rain, climbing the jungle gym, and holding up the picture for all to see. Joshua thinks that Robert is trying to tell him something. I think he was trying to tell me something about my mission. Something's going to happen, something strange. Second, Joshua had earlier met Hope, a student at the Catholic girls' school next door, and had what Joshua referred to as a biological reaction that led him to declare that he thought she was more beautiful than any of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition models. He had also shared with her the nature of his mission, about which she was highly skeptical. During the main crowning of Mary, however, she steps out of line, hands Joshua her rose, and tells him that she believes he will find what he's looking for. Joshua says, something is definitely happening. Third, Joshua learns that Freddie, his longtime tormentor, is going to have to withdraw from school because his parents can no longer afford it. Joshua then begins to notice that Freddie's clothes and textbooks are always worn in hand-me-downs. He begins to see bullying Freddie differently. On Freddie's last day, Joshua races outside after him, shakes his hand, and says goodbye. Fourth, Frank is a classmate who has been pestering Joshua to play with him. Joshua has always put him off by saying, tomorrow, but noting that when tomorrow comes, it is actually today. On a field trip, though, Joshua hears other kids make fun of Frank as he sits alone in front of an exhibit of the Buddha. Joshua goes over and tells Frank that today is tomorrow. And then finally, Dave O'Hara has stayed home from school again. He's always skipping or ill. Joshua asks his mom if they can stop by Dave's house so he can see how his friend is doing. When Joshua finds Dave in the galactic battleship, it's their play area under the stairs, he is bleeding and unconscious. It turns out that Dave suffered from previously undiagnosed epilepsy and broke his arm during a seizure. Later, Joshua buries his grandfather's shirt and says in a voiceover, "You know what? My grandfather was wrong. Someone just made God up." And this leads into the fourth and final flashback. This time, the school's Olympics field day. Joshua wants to win his race because he knows that this will be the last time his grandfather will get to see him run. Unfortunately, Joshua falls in the middle of the race and is still lying on the ground when the nun in charge begins to give out awards to the winners. Joshua's grandfather stops her and goes to stand at the finish line and waits for Joshua to run into his arms. In a voiceover, Joshua says, "I don't remember much about that day. I don't remember who won or how long I was on the ground. I do remember thinking this was the end. My grandpa would never see me run again. One of the last things I remember about my grandpa was the way he stood at the finish line waiting to say goodbye." Excuse me. Joshua goes to visit the largely recuperated Dave in the hospital, and the following exchange occurs. Dave says, "I don't think you should give up your mission." Joshua, "I think you were right. Bad things just happen and people die, and there's no one there to take care of them. It's just the way things are." Dave says, "I believe now. When I was in the galactic battleship, you walked in. It was like a miracle." "It was no miracle. Why do you think you just popped by my house that day? Why do you think you just walked in then? Lucky." "No, it was more. Just don't give it up." All of which takes us to the last day of school. Students each read an end-of-year statement. Here's Joshua's. 5th grade was the most rigorous year yet. Before this year, everything was Batman action figures and Ninja Turtle cartoons. Now there's family, friends, and girls. Before this year, bullies were just bullies for no reason. Weirdos were just weird. And daredevils weren't afraid of anything. Before this year, people I loved lived forever. I spent this year looking for something and wound up seeing everything around me. It's like I was asleep before and finally woke up. You know what? I'm wide awake now. Yes. The film wraps up with an encounter with a mysterious blonde-haired boy who has been seen several times throughout the film. He seems always to be in Joshua's vicinity and to appear at opportune moments. And that's the boy, blonde-haired boy. He's even smaller than Joshua is. Joshua says, "Hey, what's your name?" "You don't know my name? This is the first time you're seeing me, isn't it?" "I see you all the time. You're always around, always smiling, and always watching me." "This is the first time you're really seeing me." "I guess so." "You don't have to worry. He's happy now." "Who? Dave? Yeah, he'll be all right." "Not David." "They better get back. They're taking the picture." Walks away, stops and turns around. "You mean Grandpa?" "Oh." We see that the boy is no longer there. Notice that all 6 of the themes mentioned earlier appear in this film in one way or another. Evil of death as a threat to human meaningfulness and belief in the transcendent, and so forth. Shyamalan seems to be treating them seriously on a level appropriate for children of a certain age, and by implication, for adults. He does this while recognizing the challenges that a secularized culture poses. He seems to be saying that each person must seek his or her own proof of the reality of the transcendent, rather than the kind of basic natural theology the grandfather accepted as proof, the miracle of snow. Excuse me. Shyamalan seems to be suggesting a much more interpersonal, communal way of accessing the spiritual. It is in family, friends, and community that we might find our clearest clues to spiritual reality. However, it depends on what we see, on what we're ready to see. Joshua saw luck in his rescue of Dave. Dave saw it as something more than luck, more than happenstance. Notice, in fact, how keeping one's hands out, being open, opening one's eyes, looking, and being awake to see what is there to be seen are central themes throughout the film. The proof isn't a matter of a knockdown argument, right, with indisputable evidence, but it's of clues, consistent set of clues to the nature of reality. Okay, signs, more quickly. Shyamalan's early films, it's likely the two best known are The Sixth Sense and Signs, so I'm not going to take a lot of time to go through Signs in detail. As I've said, I see it as a parable disguised as an alien invasion. The parable story is about a priest, Graham, who loses his faith after the death of his wife in an accident, and then he has other threats to his faith, right? Morgan, his son, has severe asthma. His daughter, Bo, has a thing about glasses of water. She thinks they become old or funny tasting, even after only moments of sitting around. His brother, Merrill, who seems not to know what to do with his life and whose minor league baseball career was marked by 2 records, the longest home run and the most strikeouts, has come to stay in a spare room at the farmstead. The dialogue that identifies the key issue in the film is an exchange between Graham and Merrill that occurs about a third of the way through the film. They sit talking quietly at night with the children sleeping next to them on the sofa. They watch the televised images of mysterious lights in the sky over Mexico City, which are taken to be signs of alien ships that have shown up in the wake of a worldwide outbreak of crop circles. Here's the dialogue. Merrill says, "Some people are probably thinking that this is the end of the world." "That's true," Graham replies. "Do you think it could be?" "Yes." "How can you say that? It wasn't the answer you wanted. Couldn't you pretend to be like you used to be? Give me some comfort." People break down into 2 groups, Graham says. When they experience something lucky, group number 1 sees it as more than a coincidence. They see it as a sign, evidence that there is someone up there watching out for them. Group number 2 sees it as just pure luck, a happy turn of chance. So what you have to ask yourself is, what kind of person are you? Are you the kind that sees signs, sees miracles, or do you believe that people just get lucky? I'm sure that people in group number 2 are looking at those lights in a very suspicious way. For them, the situation is 50-50. Could be bad, could be good. But deep down, they feel that whatever happens, they're on their own. And that fills them with fear. Yeah, there are those people. But there's a whole lot of people in that group number 1, and they see those 14 lights. They're looking at a miracle. And deep down, they feel that whatever's going to happen, there will be someone there to help them. And that fills them with hope. Or, look at the question this way. Is it possible that there are that there are no coincidences? Merrill at that point tells a story about going to kiss Miranda McKinney, which is a very funny story. And then he says, "I'm a miracle man. Those lights are a miracle." Graham says, "There you go. So which type are you? Do you feel comforted?" "Yeah, I do." "Why does it matter?" So the film then is about the problem of evil, the nature of signs, and the contrast between divine providence and luck. The film acknowledges that different people looking at the same evidence may reach very different conclusions. To some, they are just things that happen, but to others, they are signs. Shyamalan suggests, at the least, that the divine providence non-luck view is a live possibility. Now, Shyamalan does this in several different ways. I wish I could just show you scenes. For example, he shows us the difference between distorted vision and clear vision. The very first shot in the film is through a window that reveals a tree, a green yard, and a mature cornfield. As the camera begins to pan, however, we note, if you watch the film, we note that the glass in the window is flawed, and that the view it provides is distorted. So the waves, right? He also shows us the loss of faith. As part of this panning shot, we see another wall in the bedroom on which appears the dust shadow of a crucifix that had once hung there. The crucifix is there, but it's not there. He shows us the ambiguity of signs when shortly thereafter, the camera goes out into the cornfield where crop circles have appeared. Is it a prank by Lionel and the Wolfington brothers, or the product of an unseen power? When Bo rejects a glass of water as old, is this anything other than a kind of neurosis on her part? When the family drives into town, an overhead shot shows us a large cruciform figure on the ground, which we come to realize must be a children's playground in the park. This is followed by a large building, and then attached to that building is a steeple. And these signs when seen from above. Like the crop circles, they are meant to be seen and understood from above, from a transcending perspective. When the family returns home, they hear noises on a baby monitor that Morgan is using as a walkie-talkie. Is it just static, or is the monitor picking up an alien conversation? The central ambiguity, however, occurs when we learn the dying Colleen's last words to Graham. Tell Morgan to play games. It's okay to be silly, Graham says. I will. Tell Bo to listen to her brother. He'll always take care of her. I will. And tell Graham, I'm here. Tell him to see. Tell him to see. And tell Meryl to swing away. Earlier in the film, Graham had explained these last words to Meryl. Do you know why she said that? Meryl shakes his head. No. Because the nerve endings in her brain were firing as she died. And some random memory of us at one of your baseball games popped into her head. There is no one watching out for us, Meryl. We're all on our own. Either Colleen's words are produced by dying neurons randomly firing, or they were meaningful. Graham concludes that they were meaningless, with no significance. If you know the ending of the film, you'll recall that Graham suddenly sees Meryl's bat hanging on the wall. He tells Meryl, swing away. Meryl grabs the bat and hits the wounded alien, who is now holding an unconscious Morgan and attempting to poison him. The wounded alien, who, by the way, seems to have cloven feet, as in some depictions of demons in religious art, staggers against a bookcase, on top of which stand a number of Bo's partially full glasses of water. 3 of the glasses fall over and empty their contents on the alien, who was thereby killed. In the meantime, so kind of like baptism, right? They Father, on these 3 glasses. In the meantime, Graham takes Morgan outside and gives him his medication in hope of reviving him, a hope that is answered. And then the closing scene of the film is back to the bedroom, where we see the old broken distorting glass has been replaced with new non-distorting glass. Pictures have been restored to the wall, but not the crucifix. Nor is there any sign of the crucifix's dust shadow. It's all new paint and newly hung pictures. We see Graham putting on his clerical collar and heading downstairs, where we can hear the children's laughter. He closes the bathroom door, and we see the door's inset panels produce a cross and bas relief. Very last image of the film. The themes of the film include death, evil, providence, divine sovereignty, luck, meaning, purpose of human life, faith in God's existence, children, family, community, and love. Which brings us then to Lady in the Water. Lady in the Water begins as a bedtime story, as I mentioned, and as with so many of Shyamalan's films, it focuses on the problem of evil, on the meaningfulness and purpose of life for each rational creature, and on threats to family and to community. He begins the film with a narrated mythic prologue. Once, man and those in the water were linked. They inspired us. They spoke of the future. Man listened, and it became real. But man does not listen very well. Man's need to own everything led him deeper into land. The magic world of the ones that live in the ocean and the world of men separated. Through the centuries, their world and all the inhabitants of it stopped trying. The world of man became more violent. War upon war played out as there were no guides to listen to. Now those in the water are trying again, trying to reach us. A handful of their precious young ones have been sent into the world of man. They are brought in the dead of night to where man lives. They need only be glimpsed, and the awakening of man will happen. But their enemies roam the land. There are laws that are meant to keep the young ones safe, but they are sent at great risk to their lives. Many do not return, yet they still try, but man may have forgotten how to listen. With this as background, Shyamalan tells the tale of Story, a North or sea nymph. She has come from the blue world to find one she calls the vessel, a writer who will be inspired by seeing her to compose a message of great importance to all of humanity. She shows up in the swimming pool of the Philadelphia apartment complex, The Cove, whose superintendent is Cleveland Heath. Cleveland lives near the pool in what looks like a fairy tale woodsman's cottage amidst the treed and overgrown apartment grounds. Cleveland believes Story's tale of nearby wolf-like creatures, scrunts, who seek to kill her, and he resolves to help her to meet the great eagle, the Eaglon. Yes, all these weird names. The Eaglon who can return her to her home, the blue world. The scrunts are violating the laws of that world, so Story expects the appearance of the law-enforcing ape-like creatures collectively known as the Tartutak. She will also need Cleveland's help and the help of others in the apartment complex community, some of whom will have specific named roles to play. There is a symbolist to interpret signs, a guardian to protect Story from the scrunts, a healer to awaken hope, and a guild of sisters to give strength to the healer. Cleveland goes on a mission to understand Story's tale and to gather a company to pursue the quest to return Story to her home. The problem of evil is raised and addressed in several different ways. First, humanity has gone astray by trying to own fixed land and by moving away from the always in motion sea. If you know C.S. Lewis's book, Paralandra, that should remind you of that, right? Wars and rumors of war are on the television screens in the Cove. It is to address this evil that Story appears with her inspiration and message from the vessel, or for the vessel. Second, there is the evil provided by the presence of the scrunts and the absence of the Tartutic. It turns out that the Guardian and other humans will have to keep the scrunts at bay until the Tartutic can appear. Human courage and collective action are needed until supernatural forces can come into play. A third evil consists of the injuries that the scrunts inflict on the defenseless Story. A first attack is taken care of when Cleveland swims to Story's room hidden beneath the swimming pool and returns with a magic mud called Key that can heal her. But when she is more severely attacked later on, the healer, supported by the guild of 7 women, must impart strength and hope to her. It turns out that this healer is actually Cleveland, who, before he was the apartment complex superintendent, was a medical doctor. In a powerful scene, I actually think it's the pivotal scene of the whole film, Cleveland holds Story and tearfully tells his dead wife and children that he is sorry that he wasn't present when men broke into their house and murdered them. He says that he can see their faces and that they remind him of God. He sees Story as an angel, God's messenger to him. Story begins to despair, but Cleveland, who knows about despair, tells her that she has to hold on and believe that all of this makes sense somehow. When she expresses disbelief about her own importance, Cleveland emphasizes that she has a purpose, as do all in the community who have helped her. If one doesn't see that purpose, then one must seek it out, often with the aid of others who are on the same quest. In the end, Cleveland thanks Story for saving his life by pulling him into the action of her story. This is yet another instance of Shyamalan incorporating the theme of meaningful and purposeful life. And it appears that once again, there is a sense of some kind of transcendent design that needs to be recognized and that provides the basis for the meaning and purpose. So, I had to imagine, okay, what's the critic going to say? Critic of this paper. Excuse me. The critic might point out that, admittedly, I've taken all my examples from the first part of Shyamalan's career. Under the impress of secularism as it has to do with the conditions of belief, might not Shyamalan have lost interest in such topics, or concluded that pursuing such topics in commercial films is really no longer viable? So, because there is a marked difference between everything up through Lady in the Water and the films that came after that. Might he have concluded that the conditions of belief have so changed that it is no longer worth the effort to make films that explicitly raise spiritual concerns? Well, there's several things to be said in reply to these questions. First, even if Shyamalan has lost interest in spiritual themes or has lost interest in exploring spiritual themes in his films, this would seem more a fact about Shyamalan than a fact about the possibility of making films that deal with big questions, spiritual questions. In fact, there's reason to think that there is continued artistic interest in pursuing these themes. For instance, to take a non-Shyamalan example, over the summer I watched Outer Range on Prime Video. Everybody? It's very strange. There are weird things happening in Wyoming. Holes opening up in the ground and people fall in and emerge at different time. And the characters keep looping on each other. So it has a lot to do with last year's similar topic. But the show deals with theological and spiritual themes all the way through. We'll never find out the answers to any of our questions because Prime Video decided to plug them. Anyway. Second, there is good reason to think that Shyamalan has not lost interest in spiritual themes or in pursuing such themes in his films. All of his films continue to focus on the problem of evil, especially as it impacts children and families. This is true of all the films after Lady in the Water. For example, The Happening deals with the connection between human activity and environmental degradation. The threat from the trees and plants was made very dramatically important in the story because of the focus on the young girl being cared for by the couple at the heart of the story. Shyamalan very gently suggests that the renewal of love within the couple's marriage and the extension of that love to include the well-being of the child is somehow related to the fact that the threat disappears and the three of them remain untouched. In The Visit, children are put in danger because of broken family relationships. They have never met their grandparents, and so the escapees from the mental institution were able to take the grandparents' place. Again, this is the problem of evil, especially as it affects children and their families. As mentioned earlier, Split and Glass are the second and third parts of the Unbreakable trilogy. In addition to the problem of evil, these films all have to do with questions of the meaning and purpose of human lives. In Unbreakable, Elijah Price, Mr. Glass, was trying to understand if his disease was just an accident or if it had a purpose. And in order to get an answer, Price did horrible things in order to find one who was unbreakable. In Split, Kevin Wendell Crumb, who suffers from dissociative identity disorder, which is the result of the abuse he suffered from his mother, he begins to do terrible things to those that he believes have not suffered and who are therefore impure. In Glass, again, evil, right? But there's also a search for purpose still on the part of Price, but also for the Beast of Kevin Crumb. So the framework in the framework of the whole story, we have again the problem of evil and the questions of purpose and meaning. The most recent film, Trap, is really a continuation of the focus on madness as a source of evil and suffering. The serial killer, known as the Butcher, is married with children. He walks into a trap set by law enforcement. The Butcher pulls the singer into his attempt to escape the authorities and to return home. It turns out that his wife had discovered something in his clothing that led her anonymously to contact the authorities. The Butcher attempts to kill a pop star and his wife. He wants to take his children because they are his children. Once again, we have the problem of evil and the threat to children and family. All of these later films then continue the interest in spiritual themes, much narrower. Shyamalan continues to struggle with the fact of evil and its significance for understanding the reality in which we live. Both natural and moral evil call into question the very notion of a given meaning and purpose for humans as a whole and as individuals. It is easy to be overwhelmed by the amount and nature of this evil. What can we do in response? It seems to me that Shyamalan's art suggests that at the least, we need to protect and nurture children and their families. Thank you.
We have a little bit of time for questions. We started a little bit late, so if you guys are patient enough, I'm sure Dr. Clayton would love to respond to a question or two.
Please. Yes.
So in Shyamalan's later films, you indicated that madness becomes a new theme. And I'm wondering if you think that madness becomes a new theme as at the same time society continues to neglect just the spiritual side of what it needs to be human, and that it is important to nourish one's spiritual health. You mentioned that his themes, the themes in his films at least all come back to the necessity of protecting children, but do you think that in relation of madness, it's important to protect our religious institutions or ensure that religion exists in society in some way?
Do I think that, or does Shyamalan think that?
Both.
Either, both of them.
Sure.
Well, I think that if religious institutions are functioning properly, that's going to include care for and nurturing of children and their families. It's also going to, if they're operating properly, they give an account of human meaning and purpose, right? So it's not just everything's luck, good or bad. It's not just that bad things happen to good people, but also to bad people. It's that there's actually a meaning behind this, even if it's difficult for us to see. Right? So that's if the institutions are functioning properly. Shyamalan, now he identifies with Buddhism in some form, but he hasn't said a whole lot about it. So it's not clear exactly what his attitude is. I don't know, does that answer the second part of the question?
Sure.
Okay. And then the focus on madness, I think is really interesting. There have been hints of it before. Of course, you have the psychologist in The Sixth Sense, right? Who is dealing with a child who may be mentally ill because he keeps seeing dead people, right? And he's having problems. It's only when Malcolm becomes convinced that he believes the child, right? That he begins to take into consideration other possibilities. But up until that point, madness is an evil. And certainly the suffering that the child is experiencing as a result of having these unwanted sightings of dead people who don't know that they're dead. And Malcolm has to assist him to come to a place where he sees these not as just terrifying things that are happening to him, but something that he can actually address. So Malcolm's nurturing the child in this particular case. The village, what's his face? Noah Percy, right, who stabs Lucius Hunt. There's something off about him, right? The way he behaves. I don't know if it's madness, but there's some kind of difficulty that he has. So already there we see a connection with between madness and the evil that results. Let's see. The happening. The suggestion is that people start committing suicide because of the toxins that are affecting neurotransmitters, right? Which looks like a kind of madness. It explains the madness in biochemical terms. Well, kind of explains. Gestures in the direction of an explanation. There is again there a connection between evil and madness that's just kind of built into the story. So it's I think it's a view that he held for a long time. Back in Unbreakable, Elijah Price is clearly mad. He's mad because he can't see his life as being meaningful or purposeful. But then that leads to all kinds of death and suffering on behalf of others. So I think that it's more noticeable in the later films, the madness that is, because it becomes almost the sole focus for thinking about evil and suffering. Whereas it was one of many things in the earlier films, essentially. Good, thanks. Oh, yes.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I've only seen a couple of these, so it's really neat to see the through line about the concern for children in Shyamalan's work. And you mentioned, in kind of almost an aside, that he's making films for children, or at least some of the earliest storytelling. But then you said then that which is appropriate for children is thereby also appropriate for adults. And so what do you think about this? I mean, about that connection?
Well, especially in Lady in the Water, I'd say also in Last Airbender, those he's speaking in the kind of story that children would naturally kind of gravitate to, right? So fairy tales, tales of children, magical powers, and so on.
So what is it that folks can learn, or what's the connection between what we can learn as adults from?
Because I think we're all still kids. I mean, I'm 68. I don't think I'm 68. I mean, sometimes I act like I'm about 13. My wife is here, she can testify. But I think most people find as they grow older, at some point they feel really old just because their body won't let them do things that they used to be able to do, or their mind doesn't function quite the same way. But still, I'm still that 16-year-old kid, 17-year-old kid, or whatever, or younger even. I still, at least I can, get the sense of wonder still from reading, the Narnia, for example. Lewis still draws me. In a way that I suspect later generations would be called in by Harry Potter. The child is still there, still can be awakened. So addressing something to the child might get through defenses, what Lewis used to call watchful dragons. And the children's stories were actually there to sneak past the watchful dragons who otherwise would pounce on any hint of belief, etc.
Do you think maybe it has something also to do with re-enchantment? My 16-year-old daughter, we do great, lots of camping, but she was just really sad, telling me that she no longer feels as a part of the natural world as she did when she was younger. She's recognizing that kind of separation and loss. Maybe by appealing to the child, we can presented an enchanted world that gives some truth that we would otherwise miss.
I think that's true. And it's not as though, I don't think most people ever capture the same sense of enchantment as adults that they had as children, right? Except maybe in the case of watching children experience enchantment, that you can get caught up in that. And you know, as a grandparent watching my grandkids play games, make believe, and so forth. I mean, they got great imaginations. And you get like that. Yeah, I'm there. I'm with you.
Nice things.
Maybe one more question?
What I hope. Oh yeah.
I'll ask one if you want, Brian. So go back to the initial question about, is it possible to have spiritual films in a secular age? And I guess like you're showing that is the case. So you have this director, he's going to be showcasing that. I guess you've done a good job there. So then I just wonder like why or how that's still possible given like the conditions of belief. I suppose one thing that still hangs on, what makes the spiritual hang on in the secular age is death and evil. That still resonates with people, even if secular or the disenchanted or they live in a disenchanted culture, secular culture, that's still so vivid. So do you just think that, maybe you agree, you just add to this, so that those facts about life, death and evil, which lead us to the meaning and then faith, because those points are sort of interconnected, the themes you have sort of recurring, but still all points are interconnected. So is death and evil just always going to be this entry point for Hollywood and making movies? It's going to keep the spiritual flame alive?
I think yes. The short answer is yes. But there's a whole anthropology I think that could be spun out like that. Look, what's common to human beings are common to the human experience of the world: death, suffering, meaninglessness, and so forth, right? So it's just part and parcel of who we are. And if you're going to tell a story, eventually those things are going to come into the story. So I think it's kind of a reflection of what kind of critters we are. That I don't think you can stomp it out. It still shows. I mean, Tarkovsky, the Russian director. I mean, here he is under the rule of Soviet oppression, and these wondrous films that he makes. If you've never seen one of some films, they're well, beautiful, and mind-stretching and difficult to understand sometimes. But here's someone who's in a thoroughly materialist system, and I'm not sure that he himself was a materialist, right? But still, there's a longing or something that he experiences just because he's a human being. It goes back to our human nature force. So, thanks for the question.
Well, let's thank Dr. Clayton again for I hope you'll take advantage of the series of events this week. Tomorrow night, free screening of the film Barbie with a panel afterwards. That's over in Hemmingson 004. But then Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, we're back here each night. Wednesday night is a student panel presentations on a range of different films. Thursday night is a speaker from Baylor, Mike Foley, who's going to be talking about how Hollywood has treated religion and spiritual themes. And then on Friday, a former colleague in the philosophy department here, Dwayne Armitage, will be back to talk about the more philosophical stuff that Dr. Clayton touched on at the very beginning about the meaning of secularization and how it's happened. Dr. Clayton referred to the mother reading the works of Nietzsche at one point. Dr. Armitage is going to be talking about Nietzsche and Heidegger, especially in his talk. So that's going to be really interesting if you're into sort of tracing the philosophical origins of this shift of secularization in Western culture. So great week of events. I hope we'll see you again. Thanks again for coming tonight. Bye now.